The waiting area at Gate 14 was unusually quiet for a Thursday morning. Overhead, the soft buzz of announcements merged with the distant sound of rolling luggage and half-awake conversations. Outside the windows, Denver's early light spilled across the tarmac in long golden streaks, brushing silver against the parked aircraft. Walter Jennings sat alone by the window. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance. Just a man in his late 70s, dressed in a brown windbreaker, navy trousers, and shoes that had walked farther than most people cared to imagine. His posture was upright, his breathing slow, his eyes distant. But if you paid attention, you'd notice the limp, subtle but undeniable. His left knee never quite bent like it should, and every time he stood, he braced himself first, hand on the armrest, jaw tight, as if preparing for a memory to resurface. He had booked this flight 3 months ago, Denver to San Diego, with a long-awaited stop at memory and meaning. His granddaughter Ava Jennings was graduating from the Navy's medical officer program, first in the family to follow in his footsteps, though she'd chosen healing over combat. Walter wouldn't have missed it for anything. He'd skipped his medication that morning just to stay sharp enough for the moment he'd see her in uniform. And to ensure the journey didn't turn into 5 hours of agony, he paid out of his modest pension for seat 14C, an aisle seat in premium economy, not for luxury but necessity. The extra space would allow him to stretch his damaged leg, to endure the flight without the kind of pain that turned hours into punishment. He boarded early, as instructed, his name called gently by the gate agent. No rush, no demands, just a quiet thank you and a nod, the way Walter did everything. Not because he didn't have opinions, but because a lifetime in uniform had taught him how restraint often spoke louder than insistence. Inside the aircraft, he found 14C with care. He placed his canvas duffel beneath the seat ahead, lowered himself gingerly, and exhaled. The relief was immediate if temporary. His knee appreciated the extra space. His mind appreciated the certainty. This would be manageable. That was before the footsteps came. Firm, measured, intentional. A young flight attendant stopped beside him. Her name tag read Jessica, her uniform pressed to precision, tablet in hand, and a practiced smile on her lips. "Good morning, sir," she said. "Are you seated in 14C?" Walter looked up, polite but cautious. "Yes, ma'am. Checked it twice." Jessica crouched slightly as if speaking to someone hard of hearing. "We have a situation. A family with 2 small children was split across different rows. The only block of 3 seats we have left is here, 14A through C." Walter's brow furrowed slightly. "I chose this seat early, paid for it." "I understand completely," she replied, her tone still polished. "We'd appreciate your cooperation just this once. It's for a mother traveling alone with her kids. If we don't consolidate their seating, we may not be able to close the doors." The sentence landed harder than she realized. Walter blinked slowly, his fingers tightened just slightly on the armrest. "What's the alternative?" Jessica tapped her screen. "We can move you to seat 33B in the rear cabin." "Middle seat?" he asked, though he already knew. "Yes, sir. It's the only available seat left unoccupied." Walter sat back, letting the silence stretch thin. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He was trying to weigh 5 hours of pain against a request that, on the surface, seemed reasonable. But this wasn't the surface. This was bone deep. A leg that had once taken shrapnel in the desert didn't forgive easily. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice even, "but I really can't sit back there. My leg won't make it." Jessica's smile faded slightly. "I do understand, but if you choose not to move, we may not be able to depart on time." And there it was, the invisible burden suddenly made visible, the kind that wasn't spoken but pressed silently into the room. "You're the problem now." Walter looked around. A few passengers glanced his way, some curious, some annoyed. No one said a word. But the air changed. He looked back at Jessica, eyes steady. "This is not acceptable," he said almost in a whisper. "I'll note that, sir," she replied. "But I need a decision." Walter exhaled slowly, his hands, weathered and worn, loosened from the armrest. He unbuckled his seatbelt with care, and in a voice firm but never raised, he said, "Name's Walter Jennings, Airman First Class, United States Air Force, retired. I'd like it noted that I gave up a medically necessary seat under pressure." Then he stood, slowly, painfully, and the entire cabin looked away. The walk down the aisle felt longer than it was. Walter Jennings moved carefully, gripping seatbacks with each step. His left knee, stiff and slow to bend, resisted every forward motion. His canvas duffel hung from one shoulder, but he bore something heavier, the weight of a silence no one was brave enough to break. No one stopped him. No one helped. A few heads turned, then quickly turned away. The mother with two children, now being guided into his former seat, gave him a brief, grateful smile. Not unkind, but unaware. He nodded politely and kept walking. Seat 33B waited for him near the back of the plane, an afterthought of a space, wedged between a college kid wearing noise-canceling headphones and a middle-aged consultant already working furiously on a laptop. It was the kind of seat that made you disappear. Not just physically, existentially. Walter took one look and said nothing. He tucked his bag beneath the seat, then lowered himself, slow and deliberate. The movement bent his bad knee at an angle it hadn't endured in years. He winced, not enough to draw attention, just enough to register in his breath. The college student didn't look up. The man on his left jostled his elbow for dominance on the shared armrest and won without noticing the contest. Walter folded his hands in his lap. They were broad, steady hands scarred across one knuckle, the ring finger slightly crooked from a long-heeled break. They'd once carried ammunition through fire, lifted wounded men from wreckage, held radios steady under siege. Now they just lie there. Still, quiet. The scent of stale coffee lingered in the cabin air. An overhead light above his seat blinked faintly before giving up. The cold from the window pressed in at his side. Still, Walter didn't complain, didn't speak. He had lived long enough to know what it meant to be inconvenient. 3 rows ahead, Elena Brooks watched from the aisle seat. She had boarded just before Walter, carrying a laptop bag, a tidy blazer folded neatly across her lap. She'd witnessed the exchange at 14C, the forced politeness, the transactional apologies, the way the plane shifted its discomfort onto one man without a word. She'd seen Walter stand. I saw the pain in his walk, and now, watching him sit hunched between 2 indifferent passengers, she felt something twist in her chest. Not guilt, not outrage, recognition. She opened her phone and tapped out a message. Not for social media, not for likes, but for change. The recipient, a close colleague in Transcontinental Airlines Customer Relations Division. The message was short. Passenger Walter Jennings, senior, military ID visible, forced out of confirmed aisle seat 14C despite medical need. No accommodation offered. Currently in 33BB. Crew dismissive. Cabin uncomfortable. Please escalate. She hesitated, then hit send. Some moments call for noise. Some demand action in silence. This was the latter. Walter sat still. Each breath is measured. Every few minutes, he shifted just slightly, enough to keep the pain from locking his knee into something permanent. The armrest dug into his side. The consultant's elbow never retreated. The college kid remained lost in whatever alternate universe played in his earbuds. No one looked at him. No one saw him. But someone was watching, and someone was listening. Far ahead in the cockpit, Captain Aaron Whitmore adjusted his headset. A man shaped by discipline, 22 years in service, 8,000 hours in the skinty, and a memory trained to notice what mattered. As he prepared to push back from the gate, a red notification lit up on his screen. Passenger concern, Jennings, Udemy water veteran. Medically documented seating displacement. Below it, a second line, flagged by E. Brooks. Board advisor, Diamond Elite tier. He blinked. The name Jennings meant something to him. He turned to his co-pilot. Hold taxi clearance, and he said, Sir? Just hold it. I'll be back in 2. Then he unbuckled his harness, straightened his uniform, and stepped out of the cockpit. At the back of the plane, Walter Jennings had just closed his eyes, not out of fatigue, out of resignation. Because some seats aren't just uncomfortable. Some seats erase you, and he had spent far too many years learning how to live with that. The cabin buzzed with the low hum of pre-flight rituals, seat belts clicking, overhead bins closing, tray tables being tapped into place. No one noticed the subtle shift at first, not until the cockpit door opened and Captain Aaron Whitmore stepped into the aisle. He didn't rush, he didn't announce himself, he simply walked, measured, composed, his polished boots silent on the cabin floor, the gold trim on his shoulders catching soft glimmers of morning light. Heads turned, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones lowered instinctively. By the time he reached row 33, the air had already changed. Walter Jennings opened his eyes, surprised by the sudden stillness around him. A shadow fell across his lap. He looked up. The pilot stood before him, tall and commanding, not with force, but with presence. His gaze was direct, respectful, and unwavering. And then, without a word, Captain Whitmore lifted his right hand and rendered a sharp, formal salute. The cabin went breathless. Walter blinked, unsure at first whether it was a mistake. But no, this wasn't confusion. This was recognition. Airman First Class Walter Jennings, United States Air Force. Sir, the captain said, voice strong, unwavering. Walter nodded slowly, his voice caught behind years of silence. Captain Whitmore held the salute a moment longer, then lowered it gently. On behalf of Transcontinental Airlines and as a fellow serviceman, I extend my deepest apologies. He paused. You should never have been asked to give up your seat, especially not like that. Whispers rippled down the aisle. Passengers turned in their seats. Someone in row 29 lowered their book, eyes wide. Walter's fingers curled loosely on his lap, uncertain what to say. I didn't want to cause trouble, he murmured, quiet as the rustle of a flag. You didn't, the captain replied. But we did, and I intend to make it right. He turned to the front of the cabin, raising his voice just enough to be heard. Is Miss Jessica Lane present? The young flight attendant stepped forward from the galley, her cheeks already pale. She nodded stiffly. Yes, sir. You will personally escort Mr. Jennings to seat 1A. If that seat is occupied, you will request a volunteer. If no one volunteers, you will inform them that their captain is formally requesting that seat on behalf of a decorated veteran. Jessica hesitated. Sir, 1A is currently... Then ask, the captain interrupted. And if no one steps forward, I will relocate my co-pilot to make room. And if that's not enough, I'll give up my seat. Gasps echoed through the rows. The businessman beside Walter shifted, suddenly awkward. The college student removed his headphones. Both rose quickly to allow Walter passage. Walter didn't move right away. I'm fine here, he said softly. No, Captain Whitmore said, meeting his eyes. You've been fine long enough. Let us carry the weight now. Walter nodded once. Slowly, stiffly he stood. The captain reached out, not with command, but with care, and placed a steadying hand beneath Walter's elbow. A touch of dignity, a gesture of brotherhood. The aisle widened before them, not physically, but emotionally. People made space. No one looked away now, not one passenger. All eyes followed as Walter took each slow step forward. Jessica moved ahead, her tablet clutched like a shield. When they reached row 1, a man in a crisp polo looked up, surprised. "I'm sorry, sir," Jessica said quietly. "We need to reassign this seat. It's a captain's request." The man looked past her and saw Walter, his worn duffel, his weathered face, his slight limp. Without a word, he stood. "It's an honor, sir," he whispered. Walter dipped his head, humbled beyond speech. He lowered himself into the wide leather seat of 1A. The cabin didn't applaud, not yet, but the silence now was different, not tense, reverent. Captain Whitmore turned to address the entire front cabin. His voice was steady. "We don't leave our own behind," he said. "Not in war, not in the air, not ever." Then he returned to the cockpit, and the man in 1A closed his eyes, not to escape this time, but to hold on to it. The moment he wasn't just moved, but seen. Walter Jennings sat in 1A, cradled and quiet. Not luxury, not entitlement, just the absence of being dismissed. The seat was wide, the leather soft. His leg, finally able to stretch comfortably, eased its silent protest. A crew member gently offered him a blanket and a bottle of water. Small things, yes, but done with care this time, not obligation. Still, that wasn't what brought the heaviness behind his ribs. It was the silence, not the awkward kind that had followed him down the aisle earlier, when people turned away from discomfort. This was different. This silence was full, charged with a kind of collective self-awareness. For once, everyone knew something important had happened, and no one wanted to break it too quickly. In row 5, Elena Brooks remained still. She hadn't touched her laptop again. She hadn't picked up her phone. She simply watched, hands folded, breath slow, as the man she'd quietly defended took his place at the front of the plane. Not with noise, but with presence. She glanced down. Her phone buzzed. Ops confirmed. "Jennings is now 1A. Thank you." Customer relations. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some gestures weren't meant to be finished with words. The last few passengers settled in. Tray tables clicked into place. The hum of the jet engines deepened. Final checks were called out. Then, from halfway down the aisle, a voice broke the hush. It wasn't loud, but it landed. "Staff Sergeant Jennings?" Walter turned slightly in his seat, surprised. A man had stood, mid-30s, clean-shaven head, jeans, hoodie. His voice trembled at the edge of recognition. "Sir, I served under you. Camp Victory, 2004. Echo Unit, Corporal Luis Ramirez." The name flickered in Walter's memory like an old photo in sunlight. "You," Walter whispered, eyes narrowing with memory. "Ramirez." Ramirez nodded, his face tightened, eyes already brimming. "You pulled me out after the roadside blast. I was stuck under the axle. I never got to thank you." Now the hush deepened again, but it was different. Not disbelief, not hesitation. It was reverence. Ramirez tried to say more but choked. He sat back down, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. Walter turned toward the window. His hands gripped the armrests, not from anger, not from grief, just from bearing the weight of being remembered. The man who'd once carried others to safety had grown used to being unseen. And suddenly, on this day, on this flight, he was being carried, not with arms, but with acknowledgement. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just breathed, slowly, deeply, like a man letting go of something he had held for too long. At the front of the cabin, Captain Whitmore stepped briefly into the intercom alcove. He flicked the switch, his voice echoing through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we depart, I have a few words." Every head turned. Today, a mistake was made. A man who served this country with honor was asked to give up his seat, not because of an error in booking, but because of a system that too often places convenience above dignity. Walter didn't move, but his chest lifted slightly. That man is Staff Sergeant Walter Jennings of the United States Air Force. He didn't ask for praise. He didn't ask for special treatment. He asked to keep the seat he booked because his knee, shattered in combat, doesn't bend the way it used to. A pause. We failed him, but we have the chance to do something rare. Make it right in real time. And we have. The captain's voice softened, but it never wavered. We don't leave one behind. Not on the battlefield. Not in the scary. One ever. There was a moment of stunned quiet. Then, applause. Not loud, not orchestrated. It began with two hands, then another, then another. A wave rolling through, row after row. Walter Jennings didn't rise. He didn't wave. He just sat there, still, finally seen. Behind him, Ramirez placed a hand on his own heart. In row 5, Elena closed her eyes for a second and whispered, "Thank you." And somewhere deep in the aircraft, someone pressed pause on their movie, because something real was happening at 30,000 feet, even before they left the ground. When Flight 226 touched down in San Diego, the wheels kissed the runway as gently as a whispered apology. The cabin stirred, seat belts unclicked, bags shifted, passengers stretching limbs stiff from the air. But Walter Jennings did not move. He remained in 1A, hands resting calmly on his lap, back straight, not out of stubbornness, not out of pain, but out of something deeper. For once, he wasn't in a hurry. For once, he knew the world behind him had finally seen him. As passengers disembarked, many passed him silently, but not indifferently. A few paused, offering soft nods. Some whispered thank yous. One man in a ball cap placed his palm gently to his chest in a quiet salute. Walter returned each gesture with a small tilt of the head, a glint of warmth in his tired eyes. Charlotte Hayes, walking down the jet bridge behind him, stopped briefly at his side. She placed her hands softly on his shoulder. "You reminded all of us," she said, her voice barely audible above the murmur of wheels and whispers, "who we're supposed to be." Walter didn't speak. He simply smiled, a full, unguarded smile, the kind that reached deep into the eyes, where stories long buried finally exhaled. At baggage claim, Ava Jennings stood waiting, navy blue dress uniform perfectly pressed, cover tucked under her arm, her proud posture betraying the nerves of a first-generation officer. She held a sign in careful block letters, "Welcome, Grandpa Walter." But the moment she saw him, his familiar silhouette emerging from the crowd, she dropped the sign and ran. "Grandpa!" Walter didn't brace. He let her crash into his arms, her hug fierce, eyes already welling. She pulled back and looked down at his knee. "Your leg. Did you walk far?" Walter chuckled. "I've had worse." But Ava sensed something else. Something had changed. He stood straighter, spoke lighter, like some unseen burden had loosened its grip. Later that afternoon, as they sat on a bench beneath the California sun, Ava scrolled through her phone. "People are texting me about you. Videos, articles. What happened on that flight?" Walter looked out at the water, then shrugged. "I had a bad seat," he said quietly, and someone stood up. That night, Ava found the video. Captain Whitmore's voice over the cabin intercom. The moment Walter was saluted, the hush that fell when Ramirez spoke. She cried watching it. Then she hugged him again. This time, she didn't let go for a long time. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at Walter's modest home in Rockford Springs. The seal on the corner, Transcontinental Airlines Veterans Council. Inside was a card. "Dear Mr. Jennings, as of today, you are designated a lifetime guest of honor with our airline. No booking codes, no fees. Just tell us where you're going. We'll get you there. TCA Veterans Council." Beneath the letter was a handwritten note from Captain Aaron Whitmore. "You reminded us what honor looks like in motion." Walter smiled and placed it beside the folded flag in his study. Days later, another envelope came. This one bore the emblem of the Department of the Air Force. Inside was an action report, long believed lost, documenting Walter's bravery during a covert operation in 1988. A handwritten note was attached. Sergeant Jennings, I was one of the 3 airmen you pulled out of that hangar. I made it home, got married, had kids. You saved lives no one ever told you about. You were never invisible. Not to us. Colonel James V. Riker, retrainer. Walter read it once, then again, and finally folded it quietly, placing it under a photo of his old unit. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat with it. The kind of silence that doesn't ache, but heals. The lesson. This wasn't a story about a seat. It was a story about recognition. The kind that comes too late, too rarely, but changes everything when it finally arrives. Walter Jennings didn't ask to be honored. He asked to be considered, not for what he once did, but for who he still was. His dignity wasn't in medals or memories. It was in the way he gave up his seat quietly, in the way he took it back without resentment. Sometimes the loudest truths are carried by the quietest people. Sometimes what seems small, a gesture, a seat, a silence, becomes sacred. And in a world quick to forget those who serve, it only takes one moment, one voice, one act of courage to remind us all we don't leave our behind, not at war, not at 30,000 feet, not ever.